Hey guys, today Big Daddy and I are going to introduce you to a couple more local guys. Maybe next week we'll branch out and introduce you to some Mississippi culture. But this week we're going to introduce you to Brigadier General John Gregg, and frankly it'll just be kind of a brief introduction. Probably we'll follow that up with a full-length video on General Gregg later. And the second guy we're going to introduce you to is Ruben Davis. Come along with us. Let's go explore. Meet General John Gregg. Here he is pictured in his Confederate uniform, but he was born on September the 28th, 1828. By 1841, his father became the steward of LaGrange College in Lawrence County, Alabama. A steward is what we might consider today to be a dorm dad. Mr. Gregg was tasked with feeding the students and cleaning the dorms and keeping things neat and tidy. He did all this for some compensation and also for tuition for his children. Of course, John was one of those children. John taught math for a year or so at LaGrange College, and then he proceeded to apprenticeship as a lawyer in Tuscumbia, Alabama, and then life took him west to Texas. He settled down in the town of Fairfield, Texas in 1855 and became a district judge. In August of 1858, he married Mary Frances Garth, or Molly Gregg, at her father's home in Decatur, Alabama. Now, Molly's dad was a staunch Unionist. That must have made the wedding a little bit interesting. They would have been married at a time that was convenient for his fall court schedule. He served as district judge from 1855 to 1860, when he resigned, because secession was becoming a reality. He resigned to help raise a regiment of Texas volunteers to serve, of course, during the Civil War. After John resigned his judgeship and actually became a Texas representative in the Confederate Congress, where he was a Jeff Davis supporter, and he also delivered Texas's Ordinance of Secession to Montgomery. Well, Molly came to Aberdeen to be close to family. She bought this home known as the Gregg Hamilton. John was off fighting the war, and Molly bought a home in Aberdeen where she hoped that the two of them someday could live together. Big Daddy wants me to remind you, if you want to learn a good bit about General John Gregg and his wife Molly, that you need to try to find the book 2 Stars in the Southern Sky by Davis Blake Carter. It's going to be probably kind of hard to find, but it's a great read. We've left the Gregg Hamilton home and we've made our way to Oddfellows Rest Cemetery in Aberdeen. We went through the right gate and we're riding along the rightmost road in the cemetery, just next to the fence, which is, of course, on the right side of the cemetery. We're going to visit with John and Molly a little bit more. Think about John Gregg's life. He was a math teacher. He apprenticed for a moment as a lawyer in Tuscumbia, and then he became a judge in Texas and became a potential candidate for the governor of the state of Texas. And then he became, of course, a brigadier general in the Confederate Army. As we continue down this road on the right, you're looking out toward John Gregg's tomb now. It's kind of that white splash of color in the middle of that previous frame. We're going to drive right out here and pull over to the left and park by this big cedar tree. John Gregg and his Texans saw their first bit of action at the Battle of Fort Donelson, where they were taken captive. After being exchanged, he was the commanding general at the Battle of Raymond. Then he proceeded on to Jackson, Mississippi, where he held command for a brief time. The first time General John Gregg was wounded, he was shot in the neck at the Battle of Chickamauga. After recovering, he went east and fought at places like Spotsylvania, the Wilderness, Cold Harbor, and Petersburg. On October 7, 1864, he was shot in the neck a second time while leading a counterattack at the Battle of Darbytown and Newmarket Roads. This is right outside of Richmond, Virginia. He succumbed to his wounds, and of course this presented a real problem for his wife, Molly. Molly was back in Aberdeen at the house we visited before, and she was presented with a real problem about how to get the general back to his resting place here. We'll just tease you for a future video a little bit and say it's a great story. I will tell you, though, that Mary Frances Garth Gregg made her way to Virginia and retrieved her husband's body and brought it back here. She visited this grave, it is said, every day from the home we were at before, and made her way to this cemetery, which in those days would have been considered to be out of town. Molly was also instrumental in setting up the first Decoration Day, or what we call Memorial Day, here in Oddfellows Cemetery in Aberdeen. Yeah, gotta remember that Mary Frances Gregg, or Molly, bought that house to hopefully one day live with her husband and perhaps raise a family. I think Molly's story is quite interesting in its own right, because she was definitely a successful businesswoman. She was a piano teacher and a community leader, but yet here she is, and her tombstone is marked Mrs. General Gregg. We're turning to the right, and we're going to make our way down to see Ruben Davis next. Before we go to see Mr. Davis, let's take one last look at the Greggs. Don't know if you figured it out or not, but Big Daddy has a thing for reading and, of course, storytelling. Well, this is a book entitled Recollections of Mississippi and Mississippians, authored by Ruben Davis, the next guy we're going to meet. In his book, Mr. Davis tells you how he was born on January 18th, 1813 in Winchester, Tennessee, and he moved with his parents to Alabama about 1818. Ruben attended public schools, but later he decided to apprentice or study medicine. He didn't like medicine, so he didn't practice very long. He later studied law, and he was admitted to the bar in 1834 in Athens, which you saw in a previous video, and then he commenced to practice in Aberdeen. Mr. Davis became one of the most successful criminal lawyers in the South, and he was elected prosecuting attorney for the 6th Judicial District in 1835. You've been looking at Mr. Davis's second home in Aberdeen, Sunset Hill. He was a member of the Regiment of Mississippi Volunteers in the Mexican-American War and of the Mississippi House of Representatives in 1855. Mr. Davis lived in a one-story home on the south side of town during this time frame, and the interesting thing about this home is that it had a bricked-lined swimming pool that would have been filled with water from 3 different artesian wells. You can still see the outline of the pool today because it was lined by 8 cypress trees. The cypress trees are all that's left. After the Civil War, Reuben Davis bought Sunset Hill. We leave General John Gregg's grave and we make our way toward his. Think about the fact that this guy was such a successful criminal defense attorney. He was a member of the state Congress. He was the member of the U.S. Congress withdrawing in January of 1861, well upon secession. And this is what you see. He was married a couple times, but I see no evidence or no any other markers in this family plot. We just see Reuben Davis, Mexican War veteran. No reference to anything else. No reference to anything else. I'm assuming that one or both of his wives are buried in this family plot. One of them was laid on top of the grand piano in the parlor of Sunset Hill for her wake. Nonetheless, Reuben Davis was an interesting man, and all he chose for his marker was Mexican War veteran. As we look back toward General John Gregg's grave and prepare to leave the cemetery, Big Daddy and I hope you've learned a little something about General John Gregg and Reuben Davis. We hope you will do some research, maybe even do the Google, and see what you can find out for yourself. Thank you.